Your Highness, Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'd like to add my welcome to you all. Welcome to the Dubai Diamond Conference 2019. It's an absolute honor to be here. And I'm very thankful to DMCC for having me. Not many people do, actually, in this day and age, especially with the markets being the way you are. Market consultants aren't always the most popular people when things are going bad. And I have to admit, that's where we might have messed up a little bit. See, conferences take many months of planning. You have to figure out what you're going to cover, sometimes a full year in advance. And when we were planning this conference back in January, we were really excited about the big picture view, the 5-year horizon, the 10-year horizon, and all the exciting opportunities that was going to bring. We were totally psyched about it, as people would say in California. And what happened was that market conditions got worse and worse with each passing month. We were caught a bit off guard by that. People started asking us questions like, why should I care about the long term if I can't survive the short term? How am I going to invest in the long term if I'm not making any money today or even losing money? And we were getting pretty worried about this. And truth be told, there was even a time, and I'm not sure I'm meant to be saying this, that we thought about whether we should actually change the timing of this conference, that it was just the wrong time to do it. And then we realized that what we needed to do is flip the question. Instead of asking, why should we care about the long term if we can't survive the short term? It's just as important to ask, why should we care about the short term if we can't survive the long term? What is it about the long term that really motivates me to invest in the business? What is it about the long term that motivates me to bring my own kids into the business, especially as many businesses have multiple generations? And here's a good one. If I'm losing money today, when am I going to get it back? Please raise your hand if you've asked yourself that question at some point this year. Anyone? There's only one person in the room who's had a bad year. That's amazing. And that's a good job, because we're going to be talking about something else. So we realized we had to flip the question. We realized we needed to talk about the long term, because the long term was important in motivating us about the short term. But people were anxious about the long term. There was almost a degree of anxiety about it. And that's understandable, because the long term has massive uncertainty. But it's also got massive opportunity. Now, I know it's easy for me to say opportunity and uncertainty together. Sort of sounds like the right thing to say at a diamond conference. But in changeable times, there are always opportunities. They may not be where you think they're going to be. They may not be where you even want them to be. But there are always opportunities in times of change. Let's see if this works. I do have a slide here that should come up. All right, it didn't work. All right, we did. Brilliant. Nope, it's now gone up. Here we go. Always a technology glitch. No conference will be complete without one. Change has been a real theme in our industry for a while now. I think every conference I've been to in the last 20 years has been about change. For me, it began with De Beers' supplier of choice strategy back in 2000, and then their subsequent move to Africa and increasing their beneficiation footprint. We've also seen major mining companies change ownerships or change ownership structure in those last 20 years. We've seen new junior mining companies come on stream. We've seen the rise of market-driven selling mechanisms like auctions and tenders for rough and polished diamonds, and actually Martin Leake himself has been a big part of that. We've seen big advances in mining technologies and manufacturing technologies. And all the while, the consumer that buys our product has changed. We've moved from baby boomers who had a lot of the money at the beginning of this century to Gen Xers, to millennials, with Gen Zs just around the corner. And what this has done is it's increased the pace of change, and there's no signs of that slowing down. If there's one thing we've learned about our industry in times of change, it's this, that our industry is resilient, it's strong, it's adaptable. And we're going to need those qualities because what we're facing now isn't so much change, but a new phenomenon called disruption. So what is disruption? Disruption's about game-changing events. They are events that change the whole course of an industry. They're typically out of your control, and they're almost always out of your comfort zone. It's when there's no script, there's no precedent, you're in uncharted waters. And we've seen disruption everywhere. We've seen it in technology. All of us have, and we've seen traditional newspapers being replaced by online news. We've seen digital cameras replace traditional cameras. We've seen Ubers and taxis. In Dubai, I believe we've also seen Ubers and helicopters, which is very cool. I don't know if anyone's taken one of those yet. The thing about this type of disruption is that it's very visible. We all talk about it. And more importantly than that, we all participate in it as well. We're part of that disruption. How many of you came into this room with a Kodak camera? It's okay to admit it, by the way, if you did. I happen to think they're retro cool. You probably didn't come in with a physical newspaper. How many of you came in with wearing a smartwatch instead of something more traditional? So this type of disruption is very visible. It's talked about, written about, commented on a lot. But that's only one type of disruption. There's also a second type of disruption, which happens by stealth. And this is a little bit different, because what happens here is you see a series of small changes that happen gradually, and then they hit a tipping point, and then they change the course of an industry. And an example of this could be banking, where you've seen more and more computerization on trading floors. So nowadays, you have computers that run algorithms to make trading decisions, buy and sell decisions, every minute, every second. And that's impacted thousands of banking jobs around the world. Gone are the days that if you wanted to trade corn or wheat futures, you had men usually waving their arms around in a big room. And I think if you think about marketplaces in our industry as well, like diamond bourses, they've really changed as well in the last 20 years. So we've got two types of disruption. Disruption that's sudden, that's visible, that everybody talks about, and disruption that slowly creeps up on you. And in our industry, we've got both types. We've got visible disruption in the form of lab-grown diamonds. And we've got disruption that's happening by stealth in diamond manufacturing and the possibility of automation, which could have just a bigger impact on our industry, but isn't really talked about until today. And before we go into that in a bit more detail, we have to talk about the consumer, because nobody would be sitting here if consumers didn't buy diamond jewelry. And we've all heard and read a lot about how consumers are changing, especially the millennial generation, who buy different things at different times and in different ways. And I would know, because I always like to take this opportunity to tell you that I'm definitely a millennial. I've just aged prematurely to make myself appear wiser and more credible. And it's definitely not worked, according to my very honest kids. So millennials are different. But every generation's different. And what we think is that it's not really about passing the baton from one generation to another. It's more that everyone, regardless of demographic, regardless of generation, is making different purchasing decisions than they were 20 years ago. It's because people's buying patterns change, people's value systems change. These sort of things are changeable, and they happen over time. And what this consumer change is doing, it's really amplifying the impact of disruption. There's a lot at stake, more than ever before, you'd argue. I'm not having very much luck. I think the core idea, what we're going to argue today at this conference, is that it's down to each individual industry as to how it responds to disruption. There is an opportunity to create a better industry than ever before. That's why you see car companies spending billions of dollars on electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cells. The point is that every major disruption can be a major opportunity. And that's why the theme of today's conference is Beyond 2020, creating positive change through disruption. Our fate's in our own hands. And today what we're going to do is deep dive into two main areas of disruption. The first area is going to be diamond manufacturing and the possibility of automation. And we're going to talk about that just before lunch. Straight after lunch, we're going to talk about lab-grown diamonds and what the implications of that could be on the whole industry. When we researched the conference, we recognized that these were the defining disruptions of our times. And then there's going to be a third element, because it is important to talk about the short term and the current market conditions. But it's also important to build that bridge between those long-term disruptions and today. And that's going to be the third thing that we're going to look at today's conference. I think it's important to say that this conference is different to others because of its emphasis on dialogue. It's only through dialogue and debate that you get a better understanding about how things are going and you get maturity of thought. And what we hope is that today's conference is really a starting point or a continuation of dialogue, that you take these discussions back home with you in your own boardrooms, and you continue having the dialogue. And what we would like you to do to help you do that is invite you to ask yourselves 4 questions as you go through today's conference. The first question is this: what's going to change and what's not going to change? Actually, sometimes when there's a lot going on, a lot of disruption, it's just as important to figure out what the continuities are as it is to figure out what's actually going to change. The second question is, what's actually relevant for my business, directly or indirectly? How will I connect with the material that's actually presented today? And 3, what are the opportunities? And 4, what am I doing today that doesn't lead to a brighter future? If we answer these questions for ourselves, we'll all build better businesses, and collectively we'll build a better industry. So at its heart, this conference is really for us. To start the dialogue, we're going to begin with a keynote speech from one of the major miners who's historically shown a lot of leadership in our industry. And for that, I'm going to hand back to Martin. Thank you.